So good morning once again. My name is Samgelo. We probably have spoken a number of times on email. So it is amazing to finally put some names to faces. So a warm welcome from myself. I am one of the organizers of this conference. I'm not alone. There's Kawekazi, whom you met outside, probably have heard from also. There's also Reina, who is also outside, who's also been a great part of this team. A special thanks also to Nojenda Ndungane, as well as Karabelo Temeki, who are not here, but they had conceptualized an exhibition. Of course, it didn't happen for a number of reasons, but it was a response to the themes that we had put out, and we are hoping to stage that towards the later part of the next semester. But I also just want a special mention of them because I know they devoted an unbelievable amount of time to thinking that exhibition out. If you've also seen our program, we also attached an art program, which are artistic interventions to these themes. These are people who just sent a poem, people who sent a performance lecture as a response and said, I'd like to do a performance lecture. I mean, you probably will see tomorrow there's a performance lecture by Kondiswa James as well as Vikram. These are seasoned theater professionals who said, we're going to do this. And I said, there's no money, there's no budget, please. They said, we were not asking for money, we're going to do it. We also have a poem from Philippa, which is part of her PhD. That's a long poem, about 95 pages of a poem. She's going to do that tomorrow for like 15, 20 minutes. Also looking forward to that. These are some of the interventions that we received. There's Nhlanhla Mahlangu coming on Friday with a chance for disinheriting apartheid and a chance for democracy. These are some of the artistic interventions that we received on top of the papers that you're going to see being presented over the next 3 days. So this project builds on from what we tried last year. I think when we began last year, we were basically trying to think around the 30 years of democracy, which is what I think was happening last year, that it's 30 years of democracy or 30 years of the end of apartheid. And the questions was, has it really ended? You know, where are we? What time is this? You know, is this the post-apartheid? Is this a neo-colonial? You had all of these things. I think Sizwe has a book not so long ago on the time of where apartheid has been privatized and all of that. And so when we met here last year, I couldn't put up the image up here of our meeting here last year, but I'm sure you remember that meeting where we thought of apartheid and world making, how it actually shifted quite a lot of things that are still ongoing in this moment. But the paradigm that kept coming last year was the nation state. And when we sat in the aftermath of the conference to evaluate, it became clear to us that to answer these questions, the questions of apartheid, the questions of legacies of violence, the questions of the afterlives, we have to go beyond the nation state paradigm. And then the body was the next thing we came to, because the body witnesses. These mountains become witness, these trees, these rivers, everything is a witness to what has happened to this. And so when we are speaking of the afterlives, you are speaking of the histories of this place, you've got to go against the linearity of time, collapse time in one way or another, so that 500 years is exactly this moment. You got to find a way of thinking around South Africa that takes cognizance of the entanglements, how to be here is to be entangled with the past and the present and a constantly evasive future where you're like, is this coming? Is this not? This is a place that has also defied so many projections. You know, and those of us who live in the townships, who lives in the ghettos, who lives in the outside, we know that the traffic lights are just a low vibration civil war happening at the traffic light. You're observing it every morning. You see it in a taxi, in a train, you're moving, but you're seeing this. And the question is a question of time. What time is it? And how do we think of this? So we arrived to the body with those questions. And so the papers that you're going to see being presented here are papers grappling with these themes of the body as an archive, the body as a site where we can revisit and observe these things, the body as a holder of memory of some sort, but the body as also a question of what kind of bodily dimensions of theorizing that can come from the body. How can we think about sexual violence beyond the criminal frames? How can we think about ancestral knowledges beyond, and the body can tell us more? So that is what brings us here. I hope I gave you context. So thank you so much. Thank you to the Humanities Graduate Center for the continuous support, Professor Semra Vengai, Professor Nomfundo, who will welcome us all formally just now, Nkululeko, and the whole team at the front desk, the Innovation Foundation for Democracy, Professor Achille Mbembe, Najiba, who's been really, really helpful. I think the whole foundation team has been unbelievably amazing. MJ and everybody in that foundation has been really, really helpful to help us put this together. The IFAS research, Anel, who's here, Leah, who's also here. There's also been super sweet. I said to Anel at some point, please do tell us when we are abusing your generosity. He said, oh, I would have told you by now. So thank you so much. This is what we've been trying to put together. The research office as well. Noor, I know he's not here, but he's been a greatest supporter. Professor Garth Stevens also, who's also been one of our biggest supporters in this. I mean, the support is endless in terms of the people who've said, we support this project. If you ever need anything, do come and speak with us. And then to you who came up in this rain, in this cold, and you are here. So thank you so much for coming. Professor Nomfundo, over to you. A round of applause, please.
Morning, everyone. I'll start off by just thanking everyone for making the time to come out here on this rainy day. When I woke up this morning, it was windy, it was raining, and I was like, it's going to be a terrible day. And then I got here, it changed, and now I'm seeing this place thingy being full. And then I'm like, you know what? All there was just something to just get me demotivated, but I did not listen to that, and I chose to come here. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for coming here and making this day a success. Okay, so to begin off with is just a brief introduction of myself. So I'm Professor Nomfundo Nzuza Morwe. I'm the Assistant Dean for Humanities, Postgraduate Studies, or Postgraduate Affairs. Sorry, this is giving me feedback. I'm situated in the School of Human and Community Development, where I am an audiologist in the audiology discipline. So one of my many hats that I wear is that of an assistant dean, which is why I'm here this morning. So I'm not going to say much because Samgelo has briefly given the context, and which was very apt, and I'm sure that everyone knows why we're here and what to look forward to. So my job is an easy one, just to welcome everyone, to make sure that everyone knows that you have our blessings. As the Humanities and the Postgraduate Center, we're actually glad that this is happening. And it is our second conference, which started last year. So this one is the second one. What I just want to emphasize at this point is the fact that this initiative is driven by students, postgrad students. So it's not myself, it's not the dean, it's not any of the people, senior people that Samgelo mentioned. It is you guys seated here. And some of the work that you'll be presenting is part of what you are working towards in your postgrad studies. This is not a small thing, it is a big thing. To have people to actually take the time out to listen to what you have to say and what your work is about. So I just want to commend each and every one of you for your contribution to this conference. It would not be a success in your absence. So whatever that you're going to be doing, even if it's just attending, giving ear and ear to your colleagues, does go a long way, because I mean, we can stand here all we want. If there's no one to listen to and hear what we have to say, it goes nowhere. So thank you for making the time. So before I sit down, also I just want to thank all our keynote speakers or guests who will be here. I'm not going to mention them by name because there will be someone who will be introducing them as they come up front. But I just want to take the time to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and coming here, because I know that also speaking from a lot of work that I do, sometimes taking the time to be out and engage with people, it does mean rescheduling. So we want to thank you in a special way. And then in closing, I just want to thank our sponsors, starting with the Graduate Center for hosting this and making sure that we have this day and it looks like it's going to be a success, and everyone who made sure that what needed to be done was done. And then also I want to thank IFAS, and I also want to thank the Innovation Foundation for Democracy. With that said, I declare this conference open. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think I will invite Prof Achille Mbembe, who really needs no introduction. I have put up his bio on the program, but Prof, over to you. A round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. I feel very happy this morning. When I woke up this morning, it was raining heavily. I wasn't sure how the day would turn out. And then I arrived here and I saw Mr. Elephant, Samukelo, and he looked very happy. And for a very good reason. You guys were coming in and the room was filling up. He has been working on this project for a long time. It's always good when the time comes to see that people have responded to a call, and that's clearly the case this morning. So I would like to give a warm word of congratulations to Samukelo and his team. They have done really, really well. I would also like to thank the Graduate School for the Humanities, for hosting all of us, IFAS. They also contributed to this important project. It is all the more important because it is coming from students themselves. It's your own initiative. It's your own intellectual project. You have put it right there on the table at a very critical time for South Africa and for the continent and for the work of knowledge internationally. This is a moment in the life of our world when deep sea changes are happening, both geopolitically, economically, and of course in the field of technology. All of which is somewhat conspiring to transform quite fundamentally who we are, where we happen to be, and what we aspire to. And a huge archive of this complex reconfiguration of almost everything is the body. The body in its generic sense, exactly in the way Samukelo tried to connect it to a whole set of other issues, some of which we'll be debating today and then tomorrow. So I'm very particularly impressed by the capacity you have had to put on the table a powerful intellectual proposition, which hopefully will run not only here in our own university at Wits, but also in other universities in South Africa, but also in the sub-region, if only because of the importance South Africa has always played in our sub-region and in the continent at large. I think you are a new generation of scholars and intellectuals, multidisciplinary based, and you seem to be carrying something absolutely powerful. And I personally am very delighted to be a witness in the emergence of what is clearly a movement. That's why the foundation I preside has adopted you as one of those initiatives we want to support fully. And I would like to thank Najiba, who has been helping Samukelo and MJ and the others for being there. So thank you so much, and good luck for the next few days. Let's go forward. Thanks a lot.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karabomai Rodwell. I'm a PhD candidate here at Wits in sociocultural anthropology, and I have been given the absolute honor of introducing the opening keynote for this conference. Dr. Anell Stacey Daries is a lecturer and researcher at the Center for the Study of the Afterlife of Violence and the Reparative Quest at Stellenbosch University. Her research explores the origins, trajectories, and social implications of sciences to do with the human body within the context of South Africa's pedagogical histories. As an extension of her interests, her research also seeks to explore how notions of citizenship have been constituted and reinforced by educational institutions. Furthermore, she seeks to understand how educational institutions have and continue to influence patterns of social cohesion and identity formation throughout South Africa's past and present. Through these inquiries, she seeks to understand how history comes to bear on and through the body. Please give her a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to extend my most sincere thanks to the organizers of this conference. I know how much work goes into this kind of organizing, so I'm really very, very grateful to have been invited. Also, thank you for allowing me to be present today. So, when my slides are up, just a quick note on the images. I've omitted some photographs from my presentation for the histories that they bear. Some of the images have been used scientifically to justify the oppression of marginalized peoples, and I don't want to continue safe violence. So some of the images that would be included in this kind of work, I've chosen to omit. So I'm a historian by training and by heart, and tracking long histories tends to fascinate me. Broadly, as noted in my introduction read by a very dear friend of mine, my research explores the origins, trajectories, and social implications of sciences related to the human body within the context of South Africa's pedagogical histories. As an extension of my interest, my research also seeks to explore how notions of citizenship have been constituted and reinforced through educational processes. Through this, I seek to understand how history comes to bear on and through the body. And this is how I arrive at my subject matter of my address today, which seeks to trace the history and make sense of the purpose of physical education as a science of the body. I initiate this scholarly and intellectual inquiry with a question posed in the wake of the publication of a 2019 article from my home institution, Stellenbosch University, from its sports science department. And this question reads, and I quote, "How did black bodies become a problem in the first place, end quote. In March 2019, a Stellenbosch University study from its sports science department examining the cognitive functioning of what they called colored women sent shockwaves through the country. Academics and the broader public alike expressed both shock and disgust at both the existence of the study as well as its findings. The most senior author tried to defend the article and argued that their project did not in fact study intelligence, but rather specific higher functions of the brain. A petition signed by more than 10,000 people, both academic and lay, denounced the research. The article was retracted and the university rallied, hosting conversations on a formal and informal level to try and find out what had gone wrong. Drawn in by the urge to understand why a study of this nature, once steeped in ideas of race essentialism, classism, and sexism, could have been published at that point almost 20 years into a new century, and in a post-1994 dispensation, I embarked on this research. This 2019 study compelled me to examine the science behind this type of research and the history of the academic disciplines that facilitated it. In the wake of the controversy surrounding this 2019 article, a social anthropologist from Stellenbosch University, Henry Walters, contextualized the research premise and contended that this was in fact not an anomaly. In a Daily Maverick article highlighted that race haunts the halls of Stellenbosch University. At a colloquium following the public's reaction, Stellenbosch University Professor of Education, Jonathan Jansen, said, "I am surprised that you're surprised." He had alluded to the university's history of race science in various disciplines. Moreover, in writing from the standpoint of that very sports science department, and in direct response to this vexed article, Francois Cleofas, a sport historian from Stellenbosch University, asserted, and this is where the line I made mention of earlier on comes from, and I quote, "The sports science curriculum concerns itself narrowly with the technologies of sports performance, giving little consideration to the role of ideology and politics in the field. The 2019 study makes the colored body central to the discipline's fixation on measurement. All this raises the question, how did black bodies become a problem in the first place?" End quote. Today, 6 years later, the research, publication, and fallout from this 2019 paper still guides much of what I do. Physical education and sports science have long histories locally and globally. These are disciplines that center the performance and optimization of the body. These disciplines, tied together by intellectual lineages, are closely linked to our nation's history of race-making and citizen-making. In my own scholarship, I'm not interested in the discipline merely for the sake of its function. Instead, I'm interested in these disciplines for their aftermath, for the weight they carry in the present, for the ways in which they have contributed to the social-political contours of our nation. I'm interested in these disciplines for the effect they have on the way we see and understand bodies as building blocks of nations, how we understand bodies as raced, placed, and gendered. Historically and in the present, physical education and sports science sought to perfect the art of body building, both corporal and corporate. These disciplines, past and present, have inscribed existing and pre-existing notions of citizenship, race, sex, gender, and desire onto bodies. Furthermore, my scholarship is situated in a complicated institutional and inter-institutional history. Physical education as an academic discipline in higher education only existed at previously white Afrikaans medium universities, apart from the University of Witwatersrand and the university currently known as Rhodes University. That begs the question, whose bodies were being built, and what were these bodies being built for? The history of physical education, and now as we know it, sports science, is inextricably tied to histories of militarism, particularly a type of militarism designed to control the population, to fight figured enemies beyond and within the geographical boundaries of the nation. This history of physical education is tied to the poor white question of the late 19th and early 20th centuries and the advancement of the white South African body through the means of Afrikaner nationalism. The history of physical education is tied to white supremacist ideologies of black peril and the urgency to fight against miscegenation and what they term blood mixing. The history of physical education is tied to the oppression and subjugation of black South Africans. In considering this, I seek to make sense of physical education later reimagined as sports science, and I will interchange with the use of bodily science as well, its fixation with bodily measurement, the making and perfecting of ideal citizens, the ordering of society as a corporate body, and the scientification of the discipline. Here specifically, this turn to science should be read as a kind of obscuring in pursuit of human advancement. The scientification of physical education was based on the racialized and gendered foundations that birthed this very discipline. Moreover, this scientific turn allowed for continued violence and injustice. As seen as in the article that I make reference to, the turn to science in its binary form allowed for the continued, uninterrogated use of apartheid racial categories. These are categories that have long been contested and require great nuance and deep grappling when called upon, as the systemization of racial categories allowed for the maintenance of the segregationist and later apartheid state. Physical education's turn to science obscured this dark past in the name of scientific accuracy. Through these inquiries I have presented, I contend that the methodological impulse to measure the body and perfect it was deeply rooted in ideologies of racial purity and preservation, as well as notions of nation building, citizen making, and the civilizing of the body. So now, I wish to turn to the making of physical education as a bodily science. So I will take you on a bit of a long historical trip. I hope you stay with me. In January 1945, 3 years before the National Party came into power and apartheid legislation was passed, the country's first Congress for Physical Education served as a national meeting point for South Africa's leading physical education teachers, instructors, and researchers. Initiated as a means to further the cross-institutional implementation and standardization of the subject, the conference brought together leading physical educationists to present their research findings and to share their experiences and knowledge of the subject. In setting the tone for this 4-day conference, the Secretary of the Union Education Department, Mr. A. Roberts, delivered the opening address. In his address, he presented an anecdote intended to encapsulate the impetus behind the construction of a uniquely South African physical education system. Roberts goes on to state, and I quote, "During the Anglo-Boer War, it sometimes happened that a boy, 14 or 15, would join a commando, and when this happened, the burghers tried as far as possible to keep him out of danger. On one occasion, during an engagement, a Boer general was approaching the battlefield, and while still a good distance away, he rode up a little koppie in an endeavor to get a bird's eye view of the terrain. At the top, he came across a rather scared youngster lying next to a rifle nearly as long as himself. This is translated from Afrikaans. 'What are you doing here, son?' asked the general. The boy sprang up to his feet, drew himself up proudly, and said, 'No, General, I am the reinforcements.' The youngsters are indeed the reinforcements of the nation, and we have as little right to send them into the battlefield of life without the fullest preparation and best training we can give them as we would send them into modern warfare, physically unfit and without proper equipment," end quote. While the origins of physical education and more broadly movement practices have already been located in pre-colonial periods, this 1945 speech, however, detailed the dawn of a nationalist-aligned turn in the South African physical education movement. The aforementioned anecdote highlighted defining features evidenced in the standardized South African physical education discourse in the first half of the 20th century. The first aspect emphasized is the centrality of childhood and youth development, as notions regarding the ways in which standardized physical training of white children could lead to the salvation of the nation. Roberts drew attention to the conceptualization of physical education as a practical remedy to heal social ills. The second feature outlined by Roberts relates to the use of war nostalgia, which effectively worked to evoke the history of imperial and colonial conquest across Africa. As stated by Anton Karl Max Obbels, the chair of Stellenbosch University's Physical Education Department from 1937 to 1939, the introduction of a standardized syllabus targeted at improving the nation's health was to first consider that nation's history, its traditions, and its values. Physical education programs and courses launched across South Africa in the late 20th century centralized the traditions, histories, and practices of the European settler population. In considering the establishment of government-funded national intervention programs such as the Scheme for Physical Education, which later became the National Advisory Council for Physical Education, the reclamation of romanticized pre-industrial bodily aptitude, military prowess, and the physical dexterity of the white settler body remain central in the discourse surrounding the need for institutionalized physical education. Echoing the contentions of Tula Simpson, the Union of South Africa was born in war. In tracing the rise and development and the spread of physical education across the expanse of this country, it is necessary to foreground the geographical and social-political foundations of South Africa. The South African War laid the foundation for the formation of the Union of South Africa as a segregationist Anglo-Afrikaner state. From 1910, the Union encompassed 2 British colonies, the Cape Colony, the then Cape Colony and Natal, and 2 former Boer republics, the then Orange Free State and Transvaal. In plotting the dispersion of the subject across South Africa, the progression of physical education as a standardized subject is traced along these colonial lines. In tracking the development of standardized physical education prior to the 1920s, historiographical accounts holds that the foundations of colonial physical education programs in South Africa can be traced back to the late 18th century, with the Cape Colony serving as the forerunner in this regard. On a global scale, physical education had become a matter of national interest since the 19th and early 20th century, particularly within the global north context. While physical education systems tended to interchange many ideologies, concepts, and practices, the widespread transfusion of ideas did not overshadow this desire to create a nationalized system that reflected an idealized, homogeneous national identity and culture. These nationalized systems positioned organized sport and physical training practices as remedies to address social problems that plagued modern societies. As seen in Nazi Germany, physical education was used as a tool to build ideal Aryan bodies as the bedrock of model citizens. The Aryan body was at the center of Nazi politics and considered to be a tangible to serve or as tangible and vital evidence of racial virtue and the new human type that National Socialism had brought into being. Moreover, the training of the body through gymnastics and various locally specific sport and games were integral to the building of the fascist Superman body, not only in Germany, but in contexts such as Italy and Spain. Furthermore, as various European physical education systems and programs were transferred or transported to South Africa through the avenues of colonization and British imperialism, the progression of physical education in this country is comparable to the expansion of the subject in other settler colonial nations. Presenting a comparative analysis of the origins of physical education in Argentina and Australia, Pablo Ariel Skaragradsky and Valeria Varia contend that both nations share similarities. First, both the Argentine and Australian contexts were heavily influenced by positivist and biomedical discourses, which ultimately imbued physical education with a medicalized focus. Second, due to the rise of emerging nationalism of the 19th century, military training became a central component in the development of the subject. Last, in aligning with global trends, the foregrounding of European-based physical education systems normalized certain body practices over others. This significantly oppressed existing indigenous knowledge systems, which incorporated physical education within daily practice. As discussed by Akatama Mabuti, physical education and movement practices were essential in everyday life for indigenous peoples. Through outlining the history of physical education in Zambia, Mabuti draws attention to the ways in which indigenous physical education practices were relegated to the peripheries of missionary and later colonial education systems. In accompanying this erasure, physical education as a school subject endured further marginalization in the Zambian education system. Here, Mabuti provides an acute critique of the effects caused by the institutionalization of the subject, as colonization transferred the status of physical education from being an integral part of life to becoming a school subject. The importance of physical education was diminished. Evident in the South African context, indigenous knowledge systems, which encompassed an array of movement practices, were not taken into consideration in the construction of a physical education system in South Africa. Throughout the colonial, imperialist, segregationist, and apartheid periods, the institutionalization of this subject in South Africa endeavored to mold a particular type of ideal citizen, an ideal constructed within the parameters of imperialist desires, colonialist aspirations, and nationalist ambitions. Apart from the importation of British-inspired physical education, another system makes its way to South Africa, and it was heavily supported by practicing physical educationists in the country. This was a version of Danish physical education, which was transported here by Niels Buke just before the outbreak of World War II. Buke's visit to South Africa formed part of an expansive international tour referred to by South African physical educationists as fine propaganda. In August 1939, Buke, accompanied by a troop of 32 gymnasts, arrived in Cape Town. Although it was not expected for this system to be directly adopted in South Africa, Buke's primary gymnastics would serve as a prime example for the burgeoning physical education movement in South Africa. As the creator of Danish primary gymnastics, Buke was an avid supporter of Danish and Nazi right-wing politics and closely identified with Afrikaner nationalist ideologies. Partly, Buke's support of right-wing politics, specifically Nazism, stemmed from the high priority given to physical culture and the perfecting of the young, white physique in the Third Reich. The decision to support the Nazi Party was common among many European gymnasts as the movement centralized the cultivation of the young, racially pure, perfect body. Writing in the Stellenbosch University-based journal titled Physical Education Liggaamsopvoeding, Buke stated that gymnastics is in a very high degree a national means of exerting influence, and for the rest it is a quite indispensable unit of national education should we desire a healthy, fine and competent generation. Buke's devotion to improving the physical condition of the youth aligned perfectly with the South African physical education movement's objectives. Subsequently, the ideological overlapping between the South African state's vision and Buke's core mission resulted in Buke's system of primary gymnastics becoming a hallmark feature in South Africa's first physical education syllabus. The centralized focus on the use of physical education as a means to ensure race betterment was a core objective in the standardization movement of the 1930s. Buke's system was constructed to serve as a foundational basis for all primary gymnastic systems, and it consisted of three core aims. The first First, the program aimed to address the lack, and I quote, lack of developmental and physiological stimuli that had come about as a result of changes to the habits caused by civilization, by progressing mechanization, and in this country, South Africa, the availability of cheap black labor, end quote. Due to these factors, he suggested that the South African system should first aim to achieve full muscular development, and in each exercise should be developed to lengthen and stretch the muscles to increase elasticity. Second, Buke argued that an efficient exercise regimen should incorporate all the muscles. Third, Buke stated that exercise should require a certain amount of strength to facilitate muscle development. Writing to and for a white audience, this national system reflected the prevailing notions of legitimacy and citizenship. Black South Africans are written here as obstacles to the perfection and the advancement of the nation. Intentionally, Black South Africans do not feature as part of the nation. In advocating for a rigorous exercise program, Buke's suggestion served as a window into emerging global practices in the subject for South African-based physical educationalists. Moreover, his work presented the potential of physical education practices which offered practical solutions for the problems plaguing nationalist advancement. Considering the segregated nature of the South African state, and by extension its physical education system, Buke's framework suited the objectives of the South African physical education movement. The objective to build this nation, and particularly here, when I use the term nation, I'm translating from Afrikaans, which makes reference to folk, through individual optimization and remedy of social ills, necessitated the expansion of physical education research in South Africa. The ideas surrounding the use of physical education as remedy were largely a response to the state of public health in the early 20th century, and was subsequently imbued with with a medicalized focus. Evident in the broader discourse surrounding physical education as related to physical training and exercise medicine, physical education researchers and practitioners focus on the optimization, and I quote this from a 1942 report, all the organs in the human body, end quote, through the implementation of exercise and organized movement. As the body was physical education's central site of inquiry, Claude Smith, who served as the physical education administrator for the Union Education Department and wrote widely on the meanings, aims, and objectives of physical education in the context of 20th century South Africa, asserted that the development of physical education should operate in conjunction with medical and dental professions and other health authorities. For him and other physical educationists of his time, the medicalization of the subject furthered the field's core objective and demonstrated that the contribution, and I quote, the contribution of physical education was not intellectual, technical, aesthetic, or ethical, but physical, end quote. Beyond the implementation of exercise as cure, one of the fundamental features of physical education pertained not only to the physical improvement of the human body, but also the use of methods and practice that could measure the state of health and fitness and essentially map the body. From the onset of the standardization movement, the biomedical discourse had been central as a common critique regarding the state of fitness in the early to mid-20th century was that, and I quote, the average civilian was content to move his body and use his muscles as little as possible, end quote, resulting in the supposed deterioration of the body. This argument was largely rooted in propagated fears surrounding the effects of industrialization and the white population's dependence on black labor. Thus, this medicalized branch of physical education was focused on the use of the subject as a remedy to cure and alleviate signs of physical deterioration. while childhood and youth development were proactive in the sense that it worked to instill health-conscious habits from early developmental stages, this branch of physical education was focused on examining the state of fitness and suggesting ways in which physical activity could be employed as both a preventative and a remedial approach to health. Again, I want to emphasize here that the subject of this field was continually revealed to be the white body, as standardized physical education was burdened with the task of defending and protecting it. So in making sense of these social ills I've been making reference to throughout my talk, that served as sort of an impetus for the standardization of physical education, the economic crisis in the country that emanated from the late 19th century was a core driving force. And while poverty affected South Africans across social strata, white poverty was catapulted to the forefront of national anxieties in the last decades of the 19th century. As discussed in the joint findings and recommendations of the Carnegie Commission report on the poor white problem in South Africa, poor whiteism denoted the social and economic retrogression of a considerable portion of the white, primarily rural or formerly rural population. In the 5-volume study funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and published in 1932, the poor white problem put forth 2 central questions. The first question examined the extent to which white poverty was caused by social ills. The second question interrogated the means by which white poverty could be cured or even prevented. Regarding specific demographics, the study's findings noted that economic and social decline in the white settler population was particularly noticeable among the older settler populations, contending that this population had been severed from European progress and development for generations. The report indicated that this older white settler colonial population lived in a pioneer subsistence economy with negligible differences between rich and poor. Last, the discovery of diamonds and gold, the capitalist exploitation of the mines, and I quote this from the report, the influx of European immigrants with a modern business outlook, end quote, and the rapid penetration of the railways into the interior quickly forced the country into industrialization in the 1880s. This report centers and documents the effects of this social change for the poor white demographic, who were thrusted into social change and a changed socio-economic landscape for which they were ill-equipped and unprepared. This conclusion woefully neglects the effect of this very social change spurred on by capitalist exploits and imperialism on the black population. While professing to improve the overall condition of all South Africans, the standardized physical education movement in South Africa was obsessed with fending off the biological softening of the white body. This white-centered objective was clearly revealed in the development of research in this field. In a short insert included in the 2nd edition of the country's first physical education journal, the objectives of the physical education movement for black South Africans was laid bare. The intervention plan set to address the state of health among black South Africans should be read or analyzed as a byproduct of a white-centered movement, as civilizing rhetoric was rampant within the discourse surrounding physical education for black South Africans. I stated in the text, and I quote, "The tremendous revival of physical education, which is now current to improve white South Africa, also visibly touched the natives. Without a doubt, these advanced measures are able to improve the exceptionally poor health conditions of natives, especially those who live in cities. It is desirable that the spare time of natives should be filled with organized games such as football and not with stick fighting," end quote. As discussed, national concerns regarding the state of public health in the country, particularly among the white population, served as a core driving force behind the institutionalization and ultimate standardization of this subject. The aforementioned quote boldly states the objective for the movement to improve white South Africa, Moreover, the statement clarifies the duality of the civilizing rhetoric etched into the construction of the physical education movement, which sought to first redeem whiteness from poverty and social racial contamination through the optimization of the white body, and second, to improve the physical condition of black South Africans by criticizing their movement practices and imposing Western movement systems. The perfecting of the white collective and individual body remained at the core of the movement in the second half of the 20th century as well. Writing in the 1950s, Claude Smith, who I made reference to earlier on, maintained that the introduction of the subject came about following the realization that two of the nation, and here again I'm translating from Afrikaans, so I'm making reference to the Afrikaner folk. So, following the realization that two of the nation's most valuable possessions was its youth and its land. Evidence in the original text, he speaks directly to and for the young, white, particularly Afrikaner, corporate body, and foregrounds the promise bestowed upon them to inherit the land. In the full quote translated from Afrikaans, he reads, in the last 3 decades, the world has undergone more change than in any period of the same duration. The Industrial Revolution had also spread to South Africa, and as a result, where 50 years ago our white population lived in the countryside, today, according to the latest census figures, only between a third and a quarter still live there. Moreover, it is especially the young people who undertake this second trek to towns and cities. Admittedly, the social and economic conditions of the current mechanized age has improved our standard of living, but on the other hand, it certainly has a degrading influence on the biological and moral character of our people, end quote. In locating the purpose of physical education within the context of a segregationist state, Smith emphasized that the European section of the broader South African population enjoyed what he states as a higher standard of living, which was placed in jeopardy by, thank you so much, which was placed in jeopardy, and I quote, by the dependence on cheap native labor together with modern labor-saving devices, end quote, here equating human lives and labor with machinery. Furthermore, arguing that the reliance on black labor and technology had resulted in this biological softening of the white South African population, Smith contended for an increase in research that examined the physical performance across South Africa's racial groups in order to determine the state of the nation's fitness and health. For Smith, the value of physical education and the standardization of the subject expanded far beyond the individual, as the implementation of standardized physical education would not only develop the individual body, but also instill discipline and shape young white South Africans into the ideal citizens they were destined to be. Institutionalized physical education was thus not only expected to deal with the development of the singular body, but also the molding, perfecting, and civilizing of that body as a social entity. While the call for this scientific turn had existed since the 1950s, the 1970s witnessed this official scientific turn in the field of physical education. The image is from my university from the 1970s. With this expanded focus of the applied scientific base, the field began taking shape and was more consciously redefined as a discipline that examined sport, movement, and related factors on the human body and physical performance. So here we see the race towards sport science. Despite this change, the state of the nation remained at the core of the discipline. As argued by prominent physical educationists in the context of the standardization period of the 1940s and the 1930s and 1940s, the best way to improve a nation's health, both social and physical, was through its youth. While the expansion of physical education that encompassed sport and recreation allowed for the expansion of the discipline's social impact, greater focus should be placed on the ways in which physical education was employed as an instrument of the apartheid state. In considering the broader context of the 1970s and particularly the 1980s, public participation in state-funded and supported physical education and sports development programs was largely a privilege for a segment of the population, with the masses effectively marginalized and relegated to the periphery. Furthermore, for the apartheid state, the introduction and advancement of physical education as a school subject from the early 20th century serves as a tool to further the ideological agenda of the apartheid government, as physical education was employed as a means to, and I quote this again from a recent study, to encourage a vigilant white militarism that prepared white South African boys against the total onslaught waged by blacks and communists, end quote. Physical education of the 1970s and 1980s remained invested in nationalism, as seen in the preceding decades. However, to a far greater extent than before, the discipline was employed as a means to optimize physical performance and the state of health, and also to further militarize a generation that would in turn aid in the protection and preservation of an oppressive state. In attempting to make sense of sports science's rise to prominence over physical education, it is imperative to consider the context of the 1990s. Here, two core factors serve as compelling motivators behind the centralization of sports science, namely the phasing out of physical education as a standalone subject in schools, and second, South Africa's readmission into the international sporting arena. Many physical educationists have argued that within the context of the post-1994, physical education's integration into life orientation and life skills not only affected the expansion of the discipline, but also had a negative effect on the nation's health. With regard to the effect caused by the phasing out of physical education, a 2018 report that closely examined the state of physical education across South African schools highlighted, and I quote again, life orientation and life skills curricula, of which physical education forms a negligible component, aims to contribute to instilling positive social values and pro-social behaviors. Physical education and school sport practices are closely interrelated. In South Africa, physical education underwent several policy-related restructurings, from being a standalone subject prior to 1994 to outcomes-based education post-2005, resulting in this reduction of physical education to one of 8 learning outcomes in life orientation. It comprises human movement and development to be implemented over 4 school phases, namely foundation phase, intermediate phase, senior phase, and further education and training phase, end quote. A central objective of the new ANC government, in particular the ANC government of the 1990s, was its mission to undo the injustices and social disparities caused by the apartheid regime. Physical education had a close connection to the vision of the apartheid state, thus decentering the subject that was so intimately aligned with militarism, racism, and gender binaries was a means through which to align with a new vision for a new nation, one based on reconciliation, inclusivity, and equality. As part of education reform, physical education was eradicated as an independent subject and incorporated into life skills and life orientation. Introduced as an umbrella subject, these life orientation and life skills has a strong personal development, social justice, and equity focus that had been constructed within the ideological parameters of the post-1994 state. And here I must acknowledge that these subjects do not get a lot of attention in the school system. The decision to integrate physical education and life orientation hinged on political symbolism instead of meaningful reflection of true transformation in the educational system. As discussed within the context of this new South Africa, the democratic regime did not consider physical education as a matter of national concern in the same way as before. This does not, however, mean that physical education in the post-1994 context was devoid of a political ideology. While the ethos of the post-apartheid government the post-1994 government shifted its focus away from compulsory physical education as a means to breed a stronger, healthier nation. Now, national sports pride has emerged as a core driving force. And here the imagery of the 1995 World Cup being part of a reconciliation effort in our country is a key example of this, and how the ANC of the 1990s used sport as symbolic transformation. So, as a key driving force. Following South Africa's readmission into the international sporting arena, the sporting mega event now serves as a means through which to forge the foundations of an idealized new nation. While the commercialization of sport had risen to prominence since the mid-20th century, figures in the field of physical education note that the nation's approach stands in stark contrast with international developments in the field. So, where does this long history leave us today, especially in this post-scientification era of physical education? Here, the calls for deep, meaningful transformation and the decolonization of university curricula serves as a new and ongoing turning point for this discipline. In shedding light on the extent to which colonial, patriarchal, and capitalist ideologies and practices remain unchanged in the post-1994 university context, Mabona Lerato Josimang argues that fallist movements such as Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall played crucial roles in facilitating new conversations surrounding transformation in higher education and education more broadly. Within the context of the institutional legacies of physical education in schools and universities and later sports science, Francois Cleophas, who I mentioned earlier on, who is a sports historian, states that and I quote, when student protests called for the Africanization of science curriculum, the sports science fraternity did not respond, end quote. And evidence of that is that 2019 article. Although intensified in the wake of national student protests, the move towards interrogating curricular structure within university had long featured in discourses surrounding pedagogy and the state of the curriculum in the democratic age, as illustrated by curriculum theorists such as Jonathan Jansen in the Curriculum as an Institution in Higher Education. The process of curriculum reform had threaded along slowly post-1994. Speaking from his position as then Dean of Education as what he termed as an academically conservative institution, Jansen argues that a means through which to address the lack of reform within universities is by viewing curriculum and particularly disciplines as institutional matters. The process of evaluating the state of the curriculum illuminates the fact that knowledge is not merely something codified within specific subjects and disciplines, but instead should be deemed as the underpinning ideological, epistemological, and indeed political assumptions that inform the ethos of an academic institution. In locating the genius of physical education and tracing its theoretical and practical shifts, we see the ways in which ideology had been printed onto bodies. In the age of sports science, as we know it today, the disciplinary objectives of this field largely occupies itself with issues regarding evaluation, testing, and indeed the optimization of the human body. In tracing the discipline's development as well as its scientific obsessions, I seek to come back to this 2019 article by way of conclusion. My research draws on that 2019 sports science article as a lens through which to investigate intellectual and ethical blind spots embedded within this bodily science. In attempting to unpack the disciplinary practices that gave rise to a race-based research in physical education and later sports science, the 2019 study demonstrated the ways in which essentialist notions pertaining to race and gender were etched into the construction of these disciplines, an etching that echoes loudly in the present. At its core, my research sought to prove that that 2019 paper was neither a rupture nor an anomaly. Instead, the article presents the extent to which social strata, such as I mentioned, race, gender, sex, had been and continues to be employed as fixed, immovable markers that dictate and limit individuals' capacity. Thank you.